Welcome to the Brothers in Crime podcast.
We are brothers.
We talk about true crime.
We don't take ourselves too seriously.
And you shouldn't either. Bob, I think this topic we're talking about today warrants one of those Bob trigger warnings. So you want to give the good folks listening their fair shot at understanding what we're talking about today.
I guess so. You got us recording at a different time today, which happens to be completely interrupting my happy hour. So I am here sober, and I'll give you the sobering warning. This shit is nasty. If you're going to get triggered, turn us off.
That's fair. And, I thought you put vodka in your cornflakes. I thought every hour was happy hour where you live.
No comment.
But it definitely explains why you're in such a crappy mood today. So, guys, when he starts going off the rails, you know what's going on. What we're talking about today is human trafficking, and it is, like Bob said, absolutely horrific. This is a topic that we've wanted to cover for a little while now, but we're really trying to find the right case to kind of present it. And I think we found one that really, we'll just jump right in. So, human trafficking, what is it? In case you don't know or you haven't heard, this is horrible stuff, and I think we don't talk about it enough because it's hard to talk about. According to the Department of Homeland Security, human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, coercion to obtain labor or commercial sex acts. That's a general definition. Every year, millions of men, women, and children are trafficked worldwide, and that includes in the United States. This is happening everywhere, all the time. And it doesn't matter what neighborhood you live in, what state you're in, what country you're in, what color you are, what kind of religion you believe, how much money you make. Really, this is affecting everybody. And traffickers, they use all sorts of methods to lure victims into these trafficking situations, whether it's violence or manipulation, false promises of like a job that's going to pay you really well, or even romantic relationships. Traffickers often, they're looking for people they find to be easy targets. And this can be all sorts of ways because, like I just said, they use these different tactics. So this isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of problem. It's not like, well, as long as I don't do X, then I won't be a victim. Because it can be everything from just you think you're going to a job that's going to pay you well, or you meet somebody that you fall in love with, or maybe there's a natural disaster, maybe it's somebody who's kind of hit hard times, is down and out. Often these vulnerable populations, whether it be people who are experiencing homelessness or just all sorts of things. Really, this is affecting all types of people all over the place.
So human trafficking is the term we use these days, but isn't this really just slavery?
Yeah, honestly, this is modern day slavery.
Well, that's another, I don't know why they call it modern slavery. Like, it's just slavery. Why do we have to have new names for it? Why don't we call it what it is? Then maybe we talk about it more because we'd understand what the hell we're talking about.
That's fair. I think when I say modern day, I just mean like it's happening now. But to your point, I could speak more clearly. This is slavery that is happening now.
No, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about things I've read and researched and looked at. It's just these silly names we like to put on things. And okay, so if human trafficking is somehow better than just calling it slavery, because that's what it is, it's being forced to work either in labor or sex work against your will.
Exactly. Yeah. You make a great point. And I think now it's time to jump in and look at the case that we're going to look at to really put... we're not going to share names for obvious reasons. I think in the court documents that the names are all initials. And I don't want to get too down in the weeds of the details because, frankly, they're just that horrific. But we're going to Smithfield, North Carolina. This is 30 miles southeast of Raleigh, which is a fairly good-sized city. But this town is located in Johnston County, and its population is about... What are you laughing at?
Did you say Raleigh?
What? Oh.
It's Raleigh.
My gosh.
You never know how to pronounce your damn A's. Next week it'll be Raleigh. Damn.
I swear. I start keeping a tally. Is tally, did I say that right? You want me to call it tally?
No, it's not a tally. I think it's a tally.
I'm going to keep tally of how many words that you... which you're probably right, but how many times you correct my pronunciation. Anyway,
Somebody so damn educated and well-traveled, I think you know how to pronounce some common shit.
All right, well, anyway, so we're in Smithfield, thank God, not the other city that I can't pronounce, which has a population of about 12,000 people. 12,000, okay? This isn't New York City, it's not L.A., it's not Atlanta, which, you know, are places that we might conjure up when we think about human trafficking. And this Smithfield, North Carolina, is where a man named Jonathan Lynn Jenkins, a.k.a. Max, that's a great a.k.a., I guess, operated a criminal conspiracy that resulted in the following convictions. And for the rest of this episode, honestly, I don't even want to call this guy by his name. I don't know what I'm going to call him, and it might change throughout, but I'll make it clear that I'm talking about this dirtbag. But I'm giving you his name, so if you know, just so you know. But after that, he's awful. I don't want to even acknowledge that he exists. So he was convicted of conspiracy to commit sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and of a minor. Sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion. Sex trafficking of a minor. Using the internet to promote a prostitution business enterprise. And possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. So, you got any initial thoughts about those convictions, Bob? You look deep in thought.
No, not really.
Okay, you're just thinking about getting out of here and going to your next stop. So, the indictment in this case listed this conspiracy occurred between November of 2014 and October of 2015. So, that's the covered period. Like I said, if you didn't pick it up from the actual convictions, these were crimes that included minors. So we're talking about not just sex trafficking another human being, which is horrible and atrocious enough, but maybe the only way that I can imagine that getting any worse is that we're also talking about sex trafficking minors. It's just horrible. The press release by the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of North Carolina said, and I'm going to quote it here, "The victims were young, vulnerable, and often struggling to survive. After luring the victims with promises of food, shelter, and a better life, Jenkins and his co-conspirator manipulated and controlled the victims' lives, isolating them, withholding food, and keeping all money the victims earned. The defendant beat and choked the victims, sometimes to unconsciousness. He emotionally and psychologically abused them. Among other threats, he claimed to have magical powers that allowed him to hunt down victims and kill them. He sexually assaulted the victims and forced them into sex acts against their will."
Damn.
End quote. Now, this wasn't JJ's first tussle with the law. Bob, you care to guess anything that might have been on his rap sheet prior to this these convictions?
Well, I mean, he's got to have some crimes against property like thieving or whatever, and I'm guessing there's got to be some violence in there too.
Okay, all right, that's fair. So maybe it would surprise you then to know that in 2006, this guy had no record whatsoever. But at that time, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for shooting a man named Joseph Richard Vestal Jr. So he, at least in terms of getting caught, went straight to just shooting guys and killing them.
Yeah, that's something. I was really expecting more of a low-level record. Like a long, low-level record.
Yeah, and so in that case, it's particularly troubling for me because it was reported that the victim's family opposed the plea deal in this case. Because, like I said, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder despite the fact that he shot and killed this guy. It was a state case in North Carolina, and under the plea, the parties agreed that he would serve at least 8 years in prison, but no more than 10. And I want to get a little bit into just this part because I think when we talk about some things later in the human trafficking case, it kind of makes it all make sense. So a news story that I found about this old case said that the Johnston County DA, Tom Locke, said that if the case had gone to trial, Jenkins might have been acquitted. But the victim's sister, Linda Vestal, said it was a risk that she and her family were willing to take. Quoting her, she said, "For them to have all this time to get it together and then fumble it up, something's not right. It's just not right." See, the murder took place in 1998. But the police kind of went along and, it took them a while to figure it out.
Took them 8 years to get it together. And then they say, we might not get this one over the goal line. We better just plead him out. 8 years better than nothing.
Exactly. So the DA said this was not a slam dunk case. The evidence was not overwhelming. But In this case, the most compelling evidence was that there was DNA taken from a mask that was left at Vestal's place where he was killed, and that mask had our dirtbag's DNA on it. So, I mean, it's clear he's there, but the DA said, well, it put him there, but it didn't put him there at the time of the murder per se. Now, you got any thoughts on, and I know the answer to this, so I'm asking you in the dark here, you got any thoughts on why maybe the DA didn't want to do this? You got any guesses?
Why they didn't want to take the case to trial?
Yeah. Other than losing, you think there might be any other motivation here? There is, by the way. So.
Well, gee, I guess there must be. What, was the DA in on the sex ring?
No. Because remember, this is way prior, and maybe I didn't say that yet, but no, I did. The sex ring was from 2014 to 2015.
Right. It was 8 years prior to what he was convicted on the sex ring, but it doesn't mean he wasn't, doing his thing back then.
That's fair. Well, would it inform your opinion at all if I told you that DA Locke was running for Superior Court judge at the time, or was planning to run? Actually, he was running. Excuse me.
So what? They just wanted to not have a loss?
Yeah, the guy who was the DA in this case was running for Superior Court judge. So the victim's sister thought that his decision not to prosecute the case was because he was running for judge and didn't want to lose a high-profile case right before the election. She said if he lost this trial, it would look bad. That's a quote. You seem unconvinced by that.
I don't know. I mean, that could be, I guess, but my theory on that would be I'm going to try for this and fight for justice, and if I end up losing this case, that I'm going to twist that for my judgial campaign and say, you give me that gavel and I'll make sure dirtbags like this don't walk.
Okay, all right, that's fair. I tend to kind of see it more sister's way. I think as somebody running for that kind of office, I can understand where, I mean, maybe, I don't know, I'm not the guy and I don't have any inside information. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I don't know. I think it could go either way. The DA did say that he did not contend that the sentence imposed upon Dirtbag was adequate for second-degree murder, but it was within the range of sentences. So the news article that I got this from noted that meant that Jenkins would serve about as much time as it took the police to solve the case altogether.
Fantastic. And based on a timeline you're giving me there, the 06 and 8 years and 14, 15, the minute he got out, he was into bad things.
I love this. So, Bob, I'm making him record this with me in the dark. So I have notes and he's not looked at them. But that's exactly where we're going. So he gets out in January of 2014 and boom, he jumps right into this human trafficking, sex trafficking business. Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's just awful. So I have some of the court documents from the case, and I think that's really helpful to understand just how horrific and kind of what happened here.
What case? Are we out of the murder now?
Now we're into the human trafficking case.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, because he did his time.
I'm just making sure I'm following.
He got out. We're back to human trafficking.
I don't know if we're in Smithfield or if we're in Raleigh.
What do you call it?
Raleigh.
Hey, listen, if you're from that part of North Carolina, why don't you let us know what you think? I'm sure Bob's right, but that'll be entertaining. Hit us up on social. We're on Twitter, Facebook, all the things. So shoot us a message, post on our thing, let us know.
I spent an evening in Raleigh, Durham.
Okay. Do you remember it?
Most of it.
All right, that's fair. Was it a good evening or a bad evening?
Yeah, no, it was good. I don't really remember leaving, but I remember getting there. And obviously I left because I'm not there anymore.
That sounds about right. Oh gosh. Okay, so I wanna go to the sentencing hearing, and I have the transcript pulled up, and I want to talk about the prosecutor. So the federal prosecutor. This is a federal prosecution. I want to talk about some of the comments that the federal prosecutor made during the sentencing hearing in this case. First, I want to note that the prosecutor told the court that the victims were all notified of the sentencing hearing, but decided not to come or to present any further information. And I think, to me, I just knowing how horrific this stuff is and knowing some stuff about the case, I can't say that surprises me or that I can fault them in any way, because this is so horrific and so traumatizing that even just being in this guy's presence or being involved in this in any way, I mean, I can't imagine. It's got to be just incredibly difficult. So I think if you sort of hear that and you think, well, why wouldn't they show up? You know, everybody's different. Everybody handles this kind of stuff differently.
I don't know yet, because you ain't really told me what he done did.
Okay.
I mean, you gave me the charges, but federal charges and what you actually did are two totally different things.
That's fair. I mean, I gave you what they were convicted of.
Right.
And to kind of put a little bit on that, so there was a 5-day jury trial. So the jury heard testimony over the course of 5 days before convicting them and all that. And so now, to the prosecutor's statements during the sentencing hearing, he noted to the court that he had been the human trafficking prosecutor in the Eastern District of North Carolina for 6 years. First, I just want to point out that they have a human trafficking prosecutor, which, this
right.
isn't like some, it only happens every once in a blue moon kind of thing. Like, there's somebody who's dedicated to this kind of work.
That's about as disturbing a realization as when we found out that, like, Chicago and Baltimore had those investigate the corrupt prosecutions and see if we can fix them teams.
Right. Yeah, when you're like, wow, it's sad that we have to have that. So he notes that in the 6 years, he's gotten pretty good profile for what the average or usual sex trafficker looks like. And then he goes on to say, I'm going to quote him here a little bit. He says, they look like Antoine Wallace, who is the co-defendant in this case. Says they're flashy. They make rap videos. They're very into money. I tend to describe those as an armchair psychologist as greedy narcissists. They want to make a bunch of money and they don't care who they hurt, and they see their victims as instruments for them to profit off of. And it's very calculated in that way. So that's his sort of summation of here's sort of what I typically see as these people who are doing this sort of crime. This is, sort of like the typical what he sees. And he goes on to say, so they'll, play this game that you heard about in this trial and you've heard about in other trials where they give love, withdraw it, abuse, the cycle of violence and all that as an instrument to get money. So again, that's typically what is seen in this district. This is what they're used to dealing with.
It sounds like pimping.
Yeah, I mean, really. And that's a lot of how it's described. And from what I reviewed, there's a lot of talk about in this particular case, this guy, this defendant, he's prostituting out these women. But then what the prosecutor goes to here, he says, what always struck me about this guy is how different he is in certain ways. Now I'm going to go ahead and quote. It says, he plays the game, as he would put it, very accurately. He fits the MO of sex trafficking, but he doesn't fit the MO of a sex trafficker exactly. For one thing, he wasn't that interested in the money. Now, he took the money, he took all of their money, but gave it to Antoine Wallace. That's the co-defendant. He wasn't living the flashy lifestyle while the victims were suffering. He was living at the flop house with them, and it always struck me as really odd. And as I dug into this case and I got to know him as a person, and I don't want to go into some of the stuff that I don't want to waste the court's time with stuff the court hasn't said it doesn't need to understand. I want to focus on what is useful to the court. But what struck me is that Jonathan Jenkins was not a sex trafficker first. He was a sociopath first. And in fact, I would argue he is a serial killer. I think, again, this is maybe a proffer, but if I were to go into what I was going to go into, I think I could pretty convincingly demonstrate to the court that he is not only somebody who kills, but he's somebody who kills for pleasure. And I think what happened was he gets convicted, and this is well in the record, of killing Richard Vestal and goes to prison. And he comes out and he ends up getting into this new game. He talked about this in the confession. The court heard he learned the pimping lifestyle. What's interesting to me is that so he gets into it, and I think the reason he got into it was not because he cared about the money per se, but because it was a new way to inflict pain on other human beings for his pleasure.
Interesting.
And so then he goes on to say, I'm going to be careful about my language, but I think he got off on the power plays, on the suffering, and on the misery he inflicted on these girls. Now, he didn't have a victim that was going to die in 5 minutes. He had a victim that would be there for months or years. And I think that is what he got out of this crime. And that is horrifying. In my years as a prosecutor, he is possibly the most evil and heartless human being I have encountered. And that is a competitive field, Your Honor. But this man really takes the cake.
I like the competitive field line.
Yeah, right. He goes on to say, and I'm sorry I'm reading so much of this, but I think this is very well articulated, and it really gives you an idea of what this guy was about and what happened in this case. It goes on to say, not only does he not care about other human beings, he delights in their suffering. He enjoys using his intelligence. He did go to college. He's very intelligent. But the problem was his pleasure in harm and crime outweighed his college scholarship. He was a football player. He could have gone on to have a real life. Look at him. He could play football. The issue was not that he wasn't trying to get out. It was that he didn't want to get out. He had that opportunity, and he would rather hurt other human beings, and he couldn't walk away from that. He's not somebody who got sucked into the bad crowd. He was the leader of the bad crowd. He was the guy so scary that the bad crowd was afraid of him. I think it's telling that he's not in the Bloods. It's Antoine Wallace. You know why? The Bloods are mostly immature guys running around imitating bad dudes. This guy, he's so scary that they only use him when they want to. They're too afraid to have him in their crew. He's too scary. He is, because he will go all the way.
Is this guy like in his 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s?
Let me pull you up a picture. He was 48 in 2021. So he was convicted of this in 2021. So he was 48 in 2021. And yeah, I mean, you could tell he you know, as is clear from this the record, right? He looked like he could play football, and apparently he did play some football. And so the prosecutor goes on to talk about some of this, what was inflicted on the victims in this case, right? And says the court heard horrifying testimony about physical violence, sexual violence, to include this man committing anal rape on multiple victims. We have text messages to prove it. The idea that he didn't do this from, you know, his perspective is ridiculous. There are text messages with him directing victims to prepare to be anally raped.
Damn.
This is psychological torture, and he talked about it at length in his confession. It's the most textbook description of human trafficking I've seen in my career because he understood the psychology. As he put it, I know my psychology to a T, and he absolutely does. He absolutely knows his psychology to a T, and I think that and the court heard the many ways he used love and romance. He pretended to be in love with them. He used their children. You know, he talks at one point about how he would show love to AH and then take her to buy her child some clothes. And who the court saw pictures of this child, he talks about how he would. And then the court, of course, heard the testimony that, in fact, he waterboarded the boy and beat up the mom in front of him because AH had the nerve to not want to do what the defendant wanted her to do.
Good Lord, what a creep.
And then it goes on to say, you know, he choked. There's the magic circle incident, which is terrifying, where he puts JR and BH in a magic circle, telling them, if you step out, you're going to die. After choking them to death and putting them in the trunk of a car, because what does the trunk of the car signify? Their bodies are going to be dumped somewhere. He choked the life out of BH. I think Antoine, that's the co-defendant, said she was bouncing off the bed at one point. And I think BH said this was her first night prostituting. So she was 17. She's never prostituted in her life. She's a homeless kid. And this defendant, this gigantic defendant, who's twice her size, is choking her so hard that her body was flopping on the bed and she's losing consciousness. It's hard to catalog here all of the ways that this defendant inflicted every form of violence, torture, and misery that a human being can conceive of. I firmly believe that if he's ever allowed to walk in the community, he will harm. I believe he'll kill. I believe he will psychologically torture. I believe he will physically torture. I believe he will sexually torture. He enjoys it. He takes pleasure in it. He is a pure sociopath, and he is not safe to be in this community.
Yeah, the kind of shit he's doing, that doesn't sound like somebody that is going to be rehabilitated. That sounds like just a waste of oxygen.
When we were at CrimeCon, one of the presenters said, we was talking about how, I think it was John Douglas, but I'm not 100% sure, but I think that was him. He said, you know, when these people talk about rehabilitation, he says you have to be habilitated in the first place. So you can't be rehabilitated if you were never habilitated to begin with. And I think this is the kind of guy that absolutely applies to. Here's somebody who is absolutely so broken that you know he's gone. There's just there's no fixing that. So to fast forward a bit, you know, the defense attorney had a chance to say some things which frankly weren't worth the oxygen he used to say them, so I'm not even going to talk about them. But I want to get into the court's sentence in this case for this guy. So the court said, for the nature and circumstances of the offense, the jury did convict you of the 5 charges reflected on the verdict form. They're all obviously incredibly serious charges, particularly the sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion, and doing that with respect to a minor. In count 1, count 2, the use of force, threats of force, fraud, or coercion. Count 3, the sex trafficking of a minor and aiding and abetting, and the use of ITAR and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. The offense conduct is detailed in the pre-sentence investigation report. It's hard to capture how horrific the behavior was.
Hold up. What's ITAR?
That's referring to the count about using the internet to promote a prostitution business enterprise, which comes from a law subsection I guess we don't really need to get into. But essentially, that's what it is.
Gotcha.
Using the internet for promoting prostitution.
Gotcha.
So, and then the last count the court referenced was the possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. It talks about how the conduct is detailed in the pre-sentence investigation report, and he says how hard or hard to capture how horrific the behavior was. The court went on to say, you had gotten out of prison recently and connected with Mr. Wallace, your nephew, and conspired to prostitute several women. You had, and minors, and you had learned this through relatives, you said, and you also learned it in prison, according to some of the trial testimony. In short order, AH and BH became the initial victims of the criminal behavior that you and Wallace engaged in for an extended period of time. You urged those two women to seek out additional victims, to seek those who are homeless, have nowhere to turn, perhaps have been in juvenile detention or had been put out by their families, as MJ was released from a juvenile detention facility and was recruited into the scheme. All of these women were required to engage in intercourse with you and Wallace as part of their psychological subservience to you and Wallace as part of this. JR became part of the people being victimized, ostensibly with the perception that you're somehow rescuing her. Doctor went on to explain in detail all of the issues associated with the psychological coercion, and as did you during part of what you said to the police as part of your confession. It really is a form of modern-day human slavery to include a threat with respect to RH to sell her, the sale of a human being in Johnston County as part of this horrific criminal behavior, to control all aspects of their lives, to force them to engage in anal intercourse and other forms of sexual conduct they didn't want to engage in, to be beaten and to be threatened, to be intimidated. And again, you're an imposing physical person, and all of these women were not that. And then you had BH escaping initially and then going and being involved in the shooting in connection with paragraph 19. It's horrific behavior. As for your history and characteristics, I've taken into account all of that. You're 48, you have some college, you attended Western Carolina. And it goes on to say, the court says that, he had had some abuse as a child, but that, he had finished high school, he went to college, apparently tried to play a little bit in the NFL, but didn't quite make it there, but that violence had been a part of his life his whole life. There was an assault conviction at age 25, and then obviously the second-degree murder conviction, the one we talked about earlier. So, and it goes on to say that, although the defense attorney, this is where the court sort of discounts some of the things the defense attorney said about how he should get a shorter sentence because his childhood was hard. And
he's 48. It's time to stop blaming your childhood.
And
a bad childhood doesn't make you do this kind of disgusting, disturbing, inhuman shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe if you told me he grew up in like Rwanda and was forced to execute people as a kid, maybe. But yeah, I'm with you. And so he goes on to reject that and says, no, there's no way I'm not going to give you a lesser sentence based on those arguments. It's not going to happen. And then I'm going to pick back up and start quoting the court again. It says, the court says, I will impose a sentence that promotes respect for the law and protects the public. I think protecting the public is absolutely critical in this case. I do not think that Jonathan Lynn Jenkins is an extraordinarily... I do think that Jonathan Lynn Jenkins is an extraordinarily dangerous human being who, if ever allowed to walk free on this earth, will harm women in particular, but anybody who gets in his way. At the end of the day, he has absolutely no conscience, and the trial record certainly suggested that he derived pleasure from imposing pain on these women. Others need to be deterred. To the extent that they think engaging in human trafficking is a good idea, it's not. It's horrific. It is a form of modern-day slavery inflicted on people who don't deserve that. Having fully considered the entire record, and then the court goes on to kind of explain that, and sentenced this dirtbag to 3 life sentences. He got a life sentence on counts 1, 2, and 3, all to be run consecutively, just in case, in case he figures out how to die and come back. He'll have to do that, 3 times. And then he got a bunch of months on the other counts. I think 60 on count 4, 120 on count 5. So anyway, life sentences. You got any thoughts? I just read a lot, and you've had to be quiet. So you got any thoughts about any of that stuff, what you just heard?
I'm just thinking what I think this guy really needs. We need our girl, was it Heather from Charleston, West Virginia?
Oh.
And her rake.
Oh, yeah. I feel like it was Heather.
I think that's what would have been better for this guy. Not that she ended up not having to use the rake, because she managed to, over her head, shoot him behind, not even looking. She pops the gun behind her and pops that dude, and down he goes. But I like to see her take the rake after this guy.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a form of punishment that is that would be in any way appropriate enough for this guy. I'll also note that the co-defendant in the case, who was indicted with this dirtbag, received a sentence of 13 years for his participation, which certainly doesn't seem like enough.
That's not enough. I mean, I'm glad the one bag of shit is locked away forever, but that guy... Yeah, can we get Heather go down there with her rake and then just be done with these sickos?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, but wait, there's more.
Oh, fantastic. What, it'll also increase my gas mileage and get stains out of my whites?
No, I'm not selling you OxyClean today, but remember the murder that happened in 1998 that we talked about, and then, you're kind of like, well, what are we talking about now, back and forth kind of thing? Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, that's not the end of that story.
Would the guy come back to life?
Not exactly, but this guy that we just talked about was convicted in 2024 for another murder of a man who went missing in 1999.
Oh, damn. So he done killed one guy. The police ain't figured it out. He killed somebody else. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, huh?
I was just walking through the timeline of 98, 99 to 06. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So there was this guy who went missing in 1999, and this is just so crazy. So the family said, they reported missing back in March 20th, 1999, and they hadn't heard or seen from him, whatever. And so they do the investigation. They end up, they find his a badly decomposed body in a wooded area somewhere near this Lake Myra Road in Wake County, North Carolina. And the next day, they were able to identify this victim as Elton Whitfield, but they had no idea who had killed him. And so it just sat as a cold case for a very long time. Now, remember, in 2006, Jenkins, this jerk, pleaded guilty to the 1998 murder of Richard Vestal. There was DNA evidence that was left in a mask or whatever. But after...
So how'd they figure out that it was this bag of shit 25 years later?
That's a great question, and I have an even better answer. So, in 2016, this dude gets arrested for this human trafficking and all that stuff that we just talked about, right? So that's when they arrest him, and the sheriff is taking him down for that. So when he gets arrested for human trafficking stuff, he says, "Hey, sheriff, what if I give you some information about a body?" And they're like, "Okay." And the next day, he confessed to murdering Whitfield by strangling him and then dumping his body in the woods.
What the hell did he plan to gain from confessing to a murder?
I've tried to figure this out, and I cannot wrap my mind around it. He's literally like, "Oh, y'all are taking me down for human trafficking. What if I tell you about this guy I killed?" And then I don't understand how he didn't have some sort of immunity or whatever. They must have worked out a deal ahead of time, maybe, that he would. It's crazy to me. But let me give you some details from the article that covered this, because it's.
Well, hang on a minute. Did they ever prosecute him for the second murder, the 99 murder?
Yeah. That's what I'm going to talk to you about. So let me give you some details from that first. So this is where it gets really interesting. So Jenkins tells them the police officers that are investigating this murder, this second murder, that he killed this Whitfield guy because Whitfield had also been involved in the Vestal murder, the 1998 murder, and that he was on the verge of going to the police to confess what had happened in March of 99. And that's when Jenkins decided that Whitfield, quote, had to die to prevent him from implicating Jenkins in that earlier murder.
Right, he was tying up loose ends.
Exactly.
Which bought him another 5 years, 6, 7 years before they figured it out.
Yeah, right. Now, this time around, the Johnston County DA's office, and this is a quote from the news article, quote, believed it was important to prosecute Jenkins for the murder of Whitfield to help provide justice to the victim's family for this senseless act of violence. ADA Jason Waller and Morgan Bridgers represented the case, and after 2 weeks of trial that involved many witnesses who had either retired, moved away, or died, Jenkins was convicted of first-degree murder of Elton Whitfield. Now, do you see the irony in the fact that in the 98 murder, which took them forever to figure out, they decided to just say, well, that might be hard because it's been a while and the case isn't so ironclad, so we're just going to plead down to second degree and do that and move on. And then now, after he's already been convicted of the sex trafficking stuff and received 3 life sentences, now it's important for the victim's family, which it is, and I'm glad they did this, to go ahead and go after him. However, if you're like me, my first thought was, well, if the DA had done the right thing in the first place and went after him for first-degree murder on the 98 murder, and he would have, as in this case, he received a mandatory prison term of life without the possibility of parole.
He never would have been able to do the sex trafficking stuff.
Bingo.
So all those women and girls and boys and kids and people would never have been traumatized and destroyed and treated like garbage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the DA's motivations were in that initial one. I don't know if it was because he wanted to run for judge or because it was a close case and he just didn't want to lose or whatever. But I think when a victim's family is adamant that, hey, look, we understand you might lose the case, but to us, it's more important that you try and that we go after the right thing than just pleading this down. I think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I'm going. If the family is saying, like, look, we get it. If you know this is the guy, and you're like, but I might not be able to convince a jury. Mm-hmm. And the family's saying, listen, we get that. And if a jury says you didn't prove it, we get it.
Right.
You freaking go.
Right.
You go for it. I mean, I know it costs money, and I know, I don't care about your stats, but I know it costs the taxpayers money, but that seems pretty worth it to me when you're talking about capital murder that they turned into, second degree something?
Second degree, yeah.
And took a very I don't know how you get 8 years on second degree murder. Anything with murder in it shouldn't be an 8-year deal.
And it's wild to me just, you brought up stats, right? The prosecutor's job isn't to convict people. The prosecutor's job isn't to have a great closure or, a win rate. The prosecutor's job is to just seek justice, period. I mean, and yeah. I know you're going to get going, and I'll let you go.
Dear Lord.
That is the point. And the way that happens is, in a case like that, you put it in front of the jury and you let them decide what the outcome should be. That's what you should do. And if it's hard, it's hard. And if the evidence is difficult, it's difficult. And that's the way the system works. That's the system we have. So in this situation, it's just really disheartening to me that this prosecutor felt like, oh, well, let's just plead it down and whatever. And with this kind of guy, we see what came out of that. I thought maybe you were going to bring some statistics to this episode, but I haven't heard them yet. So,
well, I mean,
you've been sleeping on the job.
I can tell you what I found, and it, I guess, in a way, is a little bit interesting. There aren't a lot of reliable statistics out there. Most of them are caveated like crazy.
Did you know that 72% of statistics are made up on the spot?
I thought it was 87, but I just made that up. So
it could be whatever you want it to be.
Right. So when I saw like a breakdown from the Human Trafficking Hotline, looking at cases from 2021, 7,500 of the cases reported to them, about 7,500 were for sex trafficking, a little over 1,000 were for labor, and 400 were sex and labor. And then the breakdown of those that are trafficked for sex, the 800 out of 7,500. So, over 10% is for pornography. And then it goes into some strange, weird things after that. Massage parlors and then it's a lot about where the beyond pornography, if we're talking about, like prostitution, it's just the breakdown is basically where it takes place, whether they're doing street prostitution or the hostess or strip clubs or truck stops or clubs or residential or in hotel motels, that kind of thing. And then for the labor trafficking, when humans are trafficked, the 1,000 cases they looked at that year or that were reported to them that year, that for labor only, it ranged from domestic work to construction, restaurant and food service, illicit activity, begging rings, factories, healthcare, all the way down to aqua farming and fishing.
Wow.
So it's just really, really wild. Now, some of the demographics, I'm safe. I can tell you that much.
Well, what do you always say? You too fat to kidnap?
Yeah, there's a strategy to that.
Right.
I have to force myself not to, eat right and exercise and do all that kind of stuff.
According to the U.S. Department of State, 27.6 million people are currently victims of trafficking worldwide. So across the world, 27.6 million people. That's
a lot of people.
One is too many, but 27.6 million people. Men, women, children. It's oh my gosh. That's just really heartbreaking. This crime is, it is awful. And you said it, I really think you made a good point that, we call it human trafficking, and not that that's inaccurate, but I think people sometimes, that's sort of this nebulous, ethereal term that people are like, oh, I don't really, okay, so you're moving people around, and it's like, well, maybe if we just called it slavery, people would understand better what we're talking about, because it really is,
Yeah, and I think it also would be helpful if we understood that, as in the case of this bag of shit that you told us about today, it's not always the stranger danger.
It's not Liam Neeson, his daughter at the movie Taken. It's not like, that can happen. That can be human trafficking.
Yeah, you can be just plucked out of a shopping mall, but more likely than not, it's going to be the same way that a lot of other horrible things happen to people. It's by someone they know. Now, it may be someone that has picked them out, befriended them or the family, but the victim isn't going to know that. They're going to think they met this nice
you're my
person.
Friend. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I want to share some resources that are available. Bob mentioned the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and they have a website, which is just humantraffickinghotline.org. They also have a phone number, 1-888-373-7888. And you can text them as well at 233-733. 24/7, confidential. It's available. It's a resource for folks. And that hotline is supported through some different, looks like kind of grants and programs and things. The Administration for Children and Families, the United States, Department of Health and Human Services. So they provide a bunch of money to help fund that. So that's kind of where that comes from. Also, another one, so that one is, I think, more specific to the United States. But for our folks who are abroad or who are interested in helping or being involved in helping abroad.
Listen, you're not allowed to call them that anymore. They're women, not broads.
You're so dumb.
Jeez.
You're so dumb. Oh, gosh. Okay, so if you're outside of the United States, instead of saying abroad, if you're outside of the United States, also another organization that I have followed for a long time is the International Justice Mission. You can find their website at ijm.org. We'll put all this in the show notes, but they are focused on helping people who have become victims of all sorts and forms of human trafficking and helping them in ways that are not just, we're going to get you out or we're going to try to stop this and then we're going to leave, but to really do the full to empower the survivors who then are released and kind of able to get out of this, to give them skills and to set them up so that they're not, what they found was essentially if you just get people out of it and then you disappear, unfortunately, a lot of times these survivors, these victims, they find themselves back in some sort of abusive situation one way or another because they've been victims and been in this world for so long that it's difficult to know how to navigate things after that. So they find ways to educate, train, equip, employ, and set them on a path where they can get the help they need and then also get the skills they need to move on and hopefully find a better life. Good grief, I just can't imagine, honestly, being sold, being treated that way. I think for folks who haven't lived that is absolutely unimaginable.
Yeah, I don't want any parts of it, and this has been extremely disturbing and depressing, and I need a cold snack.
That's fair. The last thing I'll say that you can watch is there's going to be an upcoming short film, Bandita, a human trafficking short film that I'm happy and proud to be associated with. And so as that becomes available, we'll be sharing about it. And I'll make sure there's a link kind of about it in the show notes. But human trafficking is a big deal. And the more we talk about it, the more we raise awareness, educate, and help people understand it. I think that's what we can do now. It's just like sextortion. We need to be in the conversation. We need to make people aware, and we need to do whatever we can as people on, quote, the sidelines to try to help limit and curb and end it the best we can.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on the Brothers in Crime podcast. Feedback and suggestions are always welcome. For links and resources related to this episode, please see the show notes or visit us at brothersincrimepodcast.com. We hope you'll save, subscribe, or bookmark us on your favorite podcast site and join us for the next episode.